So I wanted to talk a little bit about what is a syllogism. A syllogism is a deductive argument for a claim made of a major, minor premises and a conclusion. So this syllogism I have listed right here says, Socrates is a man, all men are mortal, therefore Socrates is mortal. So if we were to label these, this one would be our minor premise. This one would be our major premise. And this will be our conclusion. So let's take a look at how I knew those. Before we go on though, let's note that if the premises are both true and follow logical form, the conclusion must be true. There are three types of propositions in logical syllogisms. The major premise, this contains the predicate of the conclusion in addition to the middle term acting as the subject. So an example is, all mammals produce milk. Produce milks are predicate that we will see in the conclusion, and the subject is all mammals, and that is our middle term, which we'll essentially use to link our two premises together. The minor premise contains the subject of the conclusion in addition to the middle term acting as the predicate. So an example would be, all platypus are mammals. Platypus is our subject that we will see reoccur in our conclusion. Mammals, our mammals, is our link to our major premise up here, and it's the middle term. So, when we look down here, our conclusion will be the major term's predicate and the minor term's subject. And it is always at the end of a syllogism. So, in our example, if we made this a syllogism by making it have a conclusion, our conclusion would be, all platypus produce milk. There we can see we have the predicate, produce milk, and the subject from our minor premise and predicate from our major premise. If we thought about a Venn diagram of the syllogism we just constructed, we would see that we have mammals being a subset of milk producers and platypus being a subject of mammals. Now, in order for our syllogism to be valid, we have to have these subsets accounted for in the correct logical form. This is an example of an A syllogism, because the subsets are completely contained with subjects and predicates. So what we couldn't say is only mammals are milk producers, because that's not true. A tsetse fly actually produces milk. So there are some outliers. Mammals is not a subset of platypus, and milk producers is not a subset or exclusive to mammals. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between an argument being sound and being true. The truth deals with the content. So this syllogism here, premise 1, all males are people. Premise 2, I am a person, therefore I am a male. It is true that I am a male, but it's kind of trivial because I'm talking here. So it is true, but it wasn't accomplished with the right form. What we would need to do is swap premise 2 in the conclusion. So when we do this, we read it correctly. All males are people. I am a male. Therefore, I am a person. So that would be truth. So we can have a true thing, but if it's not in the right form, then it's not sound. Soundness deals with structure. So let's look at this syllogism we have here. Premise 1, all dogs eat deer. Well, we can look at that right there and say, well, that's a false premise. We know that all dogs don't eat deer. Premise 2, all deer are dogs. Once again, that's actually a breaking of the law of identity. Therefore, all deer eat deer. So this is a sound argument. However, none of the premises are true. So the conclusion is followed as false. So in creating a syllogism, it's not uncommon, and it's actually commonplace to label the form of syllogism we're using, and we categorize these by letters. We use the letter A to represent propositions that say all subjects are predicates. We use the letter E to say no subjects are predicates. Letter I represents some subjects are predicates, and letter O is some subjects are not predicates. So I've drew Venn diagrams to kind of illustrate the quality of being distributed or undistributed. So claim is distributed if it's universal or it's all inclusive. So the green slashes are gonna represent where the claim falls. So for A, our claim is all inclusive. The subject is all inclusive within the predicate, and the predicate has stuff that's on the outside, so it's undistributed, but the subject is completely contained in the predicate, so it is distributed. For E, we have the subject and the predicate being two distinct separate things, so both subject and predicate are distributed. There is nothing being shared there. For I, we have sometimes S is P. So for both, they are undistributed. For O, we have some S are not P. So our predicate is distributed. If we kind of trace this around here, we would see that we're talking about everything that is not our predicate. But the subject is undistributed because we have all this stuff here that would be undistributed. So it's a lot of the opposite when we're talking about this little region for an I form. Hopefully that sums up for you distributed and undistributed. It's talking about how inclusive the proposition is. So finally I wanted to talk about a polysyllogism, and this is a chain of syllogisms. So let's kind of dig into this. I'm going to be highlighting things. So purple will be middle term, red will be subject, and teal will be, or that kind of looks like a blue jean color. Well, this color nevertheless will be our predicate. And I've already gone down and labeled what type form these propositions are taking. And I've labeled the majors and minor premises. So, premise 1, rocks are not living things. So our subject here is going to be our middle term because this is a major premise. Are not living things would be our predicate. It's a part of our major premise, so it's going to show up in our conclusion. So I'm going to kind of skip down to our conclusion, just double check, yes, it's not a living thing. Now we have our second premise, shale is a rock. Well, rock, remember, was one of our terms. It was our middle term. And shale is going to be our subject, so we'll expect to see shale down there in the conclusion. So now our first conclusion is going to serve as our first premise, and it's going to be a minor premise. So it's more accurate, right? Conclusion. Okay. So shale, if we're dealing with a minor premise, our subject is what matters. Our predicate will serve as our middle term. Shale is not a living thing. All living things require food. So, all living things and requires food will be our predicate. That's our major premise, so we'll expect to see does not require food as our predicate down there. And shale, once again, showing up. So this is our conclusion. Shale does not require food. Premise 2, something that doesn't need food doesn't need to be fed. Our predicate is going to be does not need to be fed. Something that doesn't need food is our middle term, and up here that serves our middle term. This is our major. This is our final conclusion. Shale does not need to be fed. So that is a polysyllogism, and I hope that helped.